I can't figure out what to do with my mic. It's been stressing me out, but it's close. And now we're swapping. Oh, good God.
Buddy said, let me sing you my
It's
song.
my time. It's like simultaneously too close and too in the way of my camera that I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with mine. And then I keep bumping it with my hands.
Well,
I don't know.
You sound fine and you look fine, so I think you're good.
All that matters. I'll move it down here and just be mindful of my hands. He's still shopping.
Yes. It's going on for so long.
All right, bye, buddy.
That was like 30 continuous seconds of drinking.
He drinks like a camel where it's just like...
No, seriously, he's like, I take my daily drink at 11:15 a.m.
And then I'm done for the day. That's it. That's all the water I get. Oh my gosh. Okay.
All right, let's get the show on the
road.
road.
Oh my goodness. Oh. Anyways. Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And I have the thirstiest dog on the face of the planet.
In the world.
Anyways, we are talking about a topic that is very passionate for Maggie and I, which is intellectual disabilities. This has become a passion topic for us through just our clinical experience of having to constantly advocate for our kids who have a diagnosis of intellectual disability, because I'm just going to come out swinging. Their treatment is different than kids with other disabilities, and there's a taboo around it that just makes me sick. So we're talking about it today because it's been eating us alive for 3 years at this point. So
yes. Yeah, this is definitely a passion topic. And I think that it is also a pretty widely misunderstood topic, partially, I think in a large part due to the fact that intellectual disability is so stigmatized, and IQ and IQ testing has kind of gotten the pop psych treatment in the last, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 years. And so a lot of people know a little bit about it, and there is this really negative stigma. And it's unfortunate. So yeah, we wanted to talk about it today to introduce the topic and give some of our initial thoughts on it. We could probably talk about this nonstop for 9 hours without taking a breath, but we won't do that today. We'll just we'll stick to the outline, and then if we have more thoughts later, we will share them later.
So beginning off, this has been actually, I'll be fully transparent. This has been a conversation I've been having a lot at my job about the difference between what is just a low IQ and what is an intellectual disability, because those two things are not the same. And it comes down to the presence of adaptive skills differences. You can have an IQ that falls in the low range, depending on the test you use. I think it's kind of universally accepted that it's below 75 is considered like low. I've seen scores as high as 80 be considered low, and I even up to 84, actually. Have you kind of seen the same thing?
I have, and it probably depends on the normative sample of the test. So there are a few different IQ tests that are popular or appropriate for use with different age ranges. And so, yeah, it is kind of that, it depends on like what the average and what a standard deviation would be for that particular test. So yeah, a common one I think would be average of 100, standard deviation of 10. So maybe 90 would be like within the first, one standard deviation below.
I know.
Which means 80 would be, or 85 would be 1.5.
I know that like Wikipedia has like a bunch of the different tests all together. Hold on.
What's funny is that we actually did a lot of work beforehand.
I know, and apparently the things that we wanted to talk about were just not on our list of things.
The very first thing.
What is happening? Okay, well,
we're like, okay, we're going to talk about what IQ tests are, not look up the average or the standard deviation.
What the f is wrong with us? Okay. I don't know what's going on with me today. It's now summer break, and so I'm all like brains off at this point. We've clocked out. Anyways, I can just leave it at, depending upon the test that you use, the scores are going to be different. However, largely accepted, 75 and lower are considered to be significant, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, it is only becoming an intellectual disability when you have the presence of adaptive skill issues. I believe the medical diagnosis for that is like 2 or more adaptive areas in the schools. We give an adaptive rating scale, and the standard score that we get from that has to be commensurate with the IQ score. And so that's been the issue that we've been having at the school that I'm at, or not issue, but the conversation that I've been having over and over again is someone getting like a YCDD testing and being like, their WIPSI says it's like a 79. And I'm like, yeah, and their adaptive score is 100. They do not have an intellectual disability. Sorry. So
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to point out is that there is a difference between having a low IQ score and having an intellectual disability. And one of the main differences there is adaptive skills. So we talked our episode with Kenzie, the occupational therapist, is going to air before this one. So we talked to her about like activities of daily living and what an occupation is. And adaptive skills are kind of in that realm. So like your adaptives would be things like self-care, like hygiene and
safety awareness,
yeah.
being able to navigate your environments physically. Like, do you get lost? Like the common one I use in the schools is, do they get lost trying to go to the office?
Yep.
Or do they know where they're going and they can get themselves back and forth? Functional communication falls under adaptive skills as well. So anyways, adaptive is a big wide world.
And this would be, I think it's probably helpful to draw a distinction here between communication and language. And this has been kind of a conversation in the SLP world online right now because, you know, a lot of behavior technicians or BCBAs will talk about how they work on communication, which they do, because communication does not have to be language. It's kind of like the square versus rectangle thing. Like all rectangles are squares, but not all squares are. Nope.
All language. Yeah, all language is communication, but not all communication is language.
Yes.
Yeah,
but we're not talking about that today. So
that's for a different day.
That's for a different topic. But yeah, so it's that functional communication piece is an adaptive skill. Like how well can you, you know, make yourself
functionally get your needs
understood.
met, you know?
Yeah. So someone can have a low score on an IQ test and technically have a lower than average IQ, but their adaptives can be average or within the average range, meaning they're able to take care of themselves. They're able to stay safe. They're able to keep their body safe. They're able to handle money. They're able to hold down a job. They're able to, you know, navigate places and communicate their needs and their thoughts. So that person would have considered like have a low IQ, but not be intellectually disabled because it's not disabling to them.
And with that, for those individuals for whom adaptive deficits are present, it's about 3% of the world's population. So I think that's like 200 million people who have an intellectual disability, like an actual diagnosed intellectual disability, which makes it one of the most common developmental conditions around. And so for it to be the most common and just not talked about, I think is just criminal, truly.
It is really sad. And it does a disservice to such a big part of our population. And I think that the reason is people don't really know how to talk about it because there is such a stigma, but we can talk about that a little bit later too. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It's really like, I say sad because it genuinely like makes me feel sad. It like breaks my heart that
it gets me mad at like systems that are in place. Like it gets me mad at the establishment. You know what I mean? Like that's where I'm at.
Mad at the man.
Mad at the man.
No, but like seriously. Actually mad at the man.
Yeah, ha ha he he, but in a very real way. Yes. So anyways, I think with that, to kind of destigmatize, I think it's going to be important to talk about what is IQ? What is an intelligence quotient really? And how do we test for that?
Yeah. This is definitely one point that I wanted to touch on in this conversation because I think in an attempt to destigmatize intellectual disability, I've heard some people go so far as to say that like IQ means nothing and it's completely worthless. And I don't agree with that. I think that it is a data point, and data is useful if you know what to do with it. So, yeah, in the wrong hands, an uh, IQ score could be used as a weapon against somebody. It could be used uh, just incorrectly and be useless because it was used incorrectly. But ultimately, an intelligence quotient IQ score is data, and it tells us about how that person is processing information, but it does not give us like a 100% full holistic picture of who that person is. So that's the distinction there. And it's also not just how smart, like quote unquote smart someone is. In my mind, and the way that I like to explain it to people is that an IQ score is really getting at how fast somebody can learn something new and make connections. So that's kind of how I like to frame it in my mind. An IQ score is a data point, a piece of information about how quickly someone can learn something new.
And with that, I use a very similar definition when I'm talking with other educators about IQ. And that also doesn't put a limit on what they can learn. It just tells me how many times they're going to need to see the content before they have it down, right? So this is not a sentence. We'll talk a little bit more about that later with Maggie and her beautiful phrase of prognosis is not a prophecy. But that is a conversation I have a lot with teachers where I'm like, hey, they will get there. Just give them the extra time and the repetitions to get there, because it has to do with those connections. And for people who need more time, just give them more time. Anyways.
Yes. And you may be sitting here thinking, oh, well, I have certain things in my life that I just need more time to learn than maybe my friends or my partner or whatever. And yeah, that's because IQ is actually a full skill IQ score is a combination of 5 different subtests. And so we're going to briefly touch on kind of what each one is and how those combine for IQ. Do you want to kind of kick us off, Francie? Because you have some really...
I've got some takes when it comes to IQ tests because
Yes.
I love them for data points. But I think you have to have a really careful eye when going through the data about what this means, specifically when it comes to language. It's my big beef with IQ tests, but we'll get there because the first subtest is verbal comprehension. And this is the one that I have beef with because it is a vocabulary test and not a syntax test. And so when I get into these red meetings and they're talking about IQ and they're like, oh, well, verbal comprehension was really low. That doesn't give me a full picture about what their language skills actually are because vocabulary is so world knowledge based. And so once again, your ability to encode vocabulary and new vocabulary words would have to do with intelligence because that has to do with how you're processing and encoding language or new information. However, your use of that and the syntax that we use is a much better gauge of language abilities. So someone will try to come to me and be like, well, why didn't you do language testing? And I'm like, because their syntax is fine.
Yeah.
And just because they have a low vocabulary does not mean that they have a language disorder. So important when it comes to when we look at vocabulary just from the ability to encode quickly. But anyways, that's my beef with the verbal comprehension subtest. Anyways.
No, and I think that's a really valuable criticism because you and I know that vocabulary, like you were saying, syntax, so like that's kind of sentence level grammar. So how somebody is putting together words to communicate a meaning at the sentence level. That tells us as speech therapists a lot more about what is going on language-wise than just sheer vocab. Because vocab, world knowledge, content knowledge, that can also be very, very dependent on life experience, which can be very, very dependent on socioeconomic status, which is very dependent on privilege and race and all of these other social factors that come in. So like vocab level to me, like knowing a lot of words is great. We want kids to know a lot of words, but it doesn't actually tell us a whole lot about their language level. So yes, I think that's a very valuable criticism.
That's my beef with it. The next subtest is a visual spatial subtest. After that is fluid reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. So these 5 areas go into making your full scale. They're all weighted differently. I don't know the weights off the top of my head either because I don't give this test.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. We interact with this test a lot as speech therapists because we'll see it on like full scale reports. And if we're doing an evaluation on an interdisciplinary team, like in a school or in a clinic or hospital or something, we are familiar with these tests because we've, you know,
I
seen
read them a lot.
a lot. We read them a lot. We work with school psychs. We work with, clinical psychologists and stuff, but we don't actually give these tests. And we are not really qualified to interpret them officially. Like we can interpret them for like what we need to do, but we're not the ones writing the like cognitive profile, if that makes sense. So anyway, keep going.
So with that, this is a very verbal, full scale IQs are very verbal tests. They do have a nonverbal IQ option. I don't love it for my children for whom, and I don't love, once again, it's a data point. It doesn't make a whole picture. A lot of people like to take these tests and make them the whole picture. Do not do that. For my kids for whom they are non-speaking and they are given a verbal IQ, these tests are so compliance-based. And so there's no real way to get a good picture of a student for whom compliance is just not a part of their picture if they are non-speaking. And so don't love it for that. You have to have a knowledge of like how to take a test. How do you sit in a chair to like be compliant for like an hour or however long these tests are? Like they're big lifts. So they have non-verbal IQs. I don't love them. So
yeah, just like knowing how to take a test. Like that is, I think that we can all, if you're around our age, you might remember being in like 2nd or 3rd grade and they like taught you how to fill in the bubble on a Scantron. Did you like have a time?
Oh yeah, we had like Scantron practice before like our state assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like it's kind of like that. Like when children or people have had no experience with a system, something that's really standardized, like an IQ test, you have to like interact with it a certain way. And so for our nonverbal, especially young kids who've maybe never been to school before and don't understand that kind of like academic setting, a nonverbal IQ is like they might not even be able to complete it. And that doesn't mean that they, that's speaking more to the fact that they don't know how to take a test than it is, which is like a skill that you have to learn. So anyway, yes, great point about that as well.
Not my favorite. So with that, and we've said it a couple times and we've alluded to this, but I mean this so wholeheartedly. IQ is not the whole picture and it's not a condemnation. Like it's not like a sentence, like I hand you an IQ of 71, like you're condemned to this. No, that is not how that works. Maggie speaks so beautifully about prognosis not being a prophecy. So I'm going to let you speak on that because it really is gorgeous. So,
well, thank you. This is something I've been thinking about a lot because, and I posted about it on my personal, like my business Instagram a couple weeks ago. A prognosis after you receive a diagnosis is an educated guess on what the future is going to look like for that person based on what it has looked like for other people with the same diagnosis and about a dozen factors that are specific to that individual. So lots of things go into cooking up a prognosis, and what it really is an educated guess. Because I'm a firm believer that clarity is kindness, and it would not be kind to have a person or parents, caregivers of a child come in, be given a diagnosis like intellectual disability or autism or Down syndrome, and then just be like, but we don't know what's going to happen. Like that, yeah, on a certain level, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we have all of this data and experience behind us that we can kind of help give people like a rough roadmap, or at least like, here are maybe some things that you might come up against. Here's some therapies that might be helpful for your child or for yourself, but it's not a prophecy. It's not something that is necessarily going to be 100% accurate, especially for disabilities that exist on a spectrum like intellectual disability. So someone who has severe intellectual impairment versus someone who has a mild form of intellectual impairment, their prognoses are going to look really different, but sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly how it's going to play out, especially in early childhood. So that's my spiel on prognoses. I think that, yes, we have to prognosticate. That's something that as clinicians we should be doing. But it's kind of like IQ. Like it's a series of data points. It's a series of educated guesses of like, this is not the whole picture of this person. It's an educated guess on what might happen based on what we know so far.
Mm. Yeah, done and dusted. I love that. No, and so there are so many examples that I have of where we've done an IQ test on a student. The IQ was whatever it was, and they were actually performing well above what their IQ would dictate. And I've also had the opposite, where we were like, they're performing way lower than their IQ would dictate.
Yes.
So like, there's just no, once it's data points, it's all stuff that we're collecting, but it's not a perfect picture of how the student, I say student, once again, we're school-based, how the person is performing. And so with that, why are two SLPs talking about this for a test that we don't give?
Yeah. No, seriously. I know, I'm sure that like a clinical psychologist, if they see this, they're probably like, be quiet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, quiet now.
Which is honestly
you.
so fair. But yeah, why are we talking about this? Because this is really important to us. We work with a lot of students that have intellectual disability. First of all, this can exist on its own as a diagnosis, but this diagnosis is also comorbid, meaning like happening at the same time with a lot of other diagnoses that are very relevant to our field. So like namely autism, Down syndrome. There are a number of developmental disabilities that have this as kind of a piece of it, something that co-occurs a lot. So we see it a lot. We work with a lot of students that have intellectual disability, and it is so stigmatized that we have kind of like over the years grown to be really defensive of people with ID. So yeah.
No, like perfectly said. We frequently are using the phrase of like, stop being mean to my friends.
Yes.
Because so often they are boxed into this kind of monolith. Once again, frequent saying on this page, disability is not a monolith. And for somebody who has a diagnosis of intellectual disability, they are so often painted into this one picture of what intellectual disability can be, and so many people are scared of that. And so it's not fair, it's not cool, it's not nice, any of that for something that is so unique and individualized. And so I've seen the progress that we've seen in the autism community of being like, autism is a spectrum and we're neurodiversity affirming. And I hate the fact that people draw the line at intellectual disabilities within that neurodiverse umbrella. Because for whatever reason, there's different reasons that people do that. And I hate all of them. So
yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, well, and just to be blunt, I hear people say, at least they're cognitively intact, or at least this doesn't affect cognition, or like, I just couldn't live like that. Or if my mind started, and this is really, I've heard people say this out loud, it is so violent and so crass and blunt, but like people say, if my mind ever starts to go, just take me out back and shoot me. What? I'm sorry, what? Like,
appalled.
It is here's the deal. It is okay. We've said this before. All emotions are allowed in the conversation around disability, but why do we have to make it a hierarchy? Why do we have to say it is okay to say, I fear losing skills as I age. It's okay to say, like, I'm afraid I have a, hypothetically, I have a family history of dementia. I've seen how sad and difficult it was for, my grandmother to go through memory loss and lose those skills that she once had. I'm afraid that that's going to happen to me. Valid. That is a valid fear. You're
it's
allowed.
When we get to it's when we get to that other side of like, I would hate myself if I lived your life.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. Pump the brakes.
We have to. I think that it is important, especially like for people like me and Francie, who are in the disability space a lot and interact a lot with people who this is their developmental lived experience. This has always been a part of their life. It always will be. There is no like outside of this.
And I think it's so hurtful for me because I love the people that I work with.
Mhm.
And so who, yes, things have been hard for them. Systems have been in place that make their life difficult. And disability in and of itself is tough. However, they are still happy and kind and we have fun together. And so like it's hard for me to hold the fun and enjoyment that we have together and the connection that we have with other people being like, that sucks.
Yeah.
Because what? What do you mean?
And this is not us trying to glaze over the difficulty of living with especially a severe cognitive impairment or intellectual disability, because that is also something that I know that I have had moments at work where I get really close with a student or client who has a diagnosis like that, and I, f- I feel genuine fear for their future of like,
Yeah.
I want them to have the support that they need. I want them to be able to live safely as an adult. I don't want people to take advantage of them. I don't want them to get hurt because I care for them as a person. And I can only imagine how much that is compounded by being that person's parent or caregiver or sibling
Mhm.
or, you know,
Whomever. Yeah.
whoever. It's that piece is real. Like the disability of or the disabling part of disability is real and legitimate and present. But what you said earlier, Francie, I wrote it down word for word in our outline. You said like, but they're still entitled to all the joys of the human experience. And so I don't like the conversation around like quote unquote quality of life. Or I feel like when I make posts online about uh disability in general, this always kind of comes up. And this is just me as a speech therapist making posts about, my opinion. I've seen similar and even worse comments on uh, the pages of people who share, their disabled children or disabled family members. They just because you are disabled, intellectually disabled, doesn't mean you don't deserve a beautiful life. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve to feel the love of your family. And, we always say like feel the sun on your skin and like drink a chai tea latte in the sun. Like, because those are
'Cause
our
that's
favorite things to
I was
do.
gonna say that's my favorite thing is to go lay
Yes.
on my patio and drink a chai latte. Like that is when I feel truly like blissed out and like full of joy. And so
And
everybody should have access to that regardless of ability. And so to see people be so condemning because of a diagnosis, thumbs down. Thumbs
it's
down.
not just about what
It's
we
not
can
about
produce.
no, it's not about that. Ugh.
Yeah. So this brings us back to, I mean, I think this really, speaking for both of us, Francie, like our hearts are so rooted in this of like
Mhm.
disability is real. All emotions are allowed, anger, confusion, sadness, like deep sadness and grief. That is allowed and valid in this conversation because life is harder with disability. Um, but it doesn't mean that disabled people don't deserve a full and happy life.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean they can't have one. It's just,
Yeah.
ugh,
Measuring the value of life based off of an IQ is not the way that I would choose to measure the value of life, or measuring my value from what I can produce or what I can do doesn't paint the full picture of me, and I wouldn't want to paint the full picture of anybody else that way. And
yeah.
so, ugh, no thanks.
Yeah. I feel like we're kind of bumming ourselves out with this, but
But
it is
once
a
again,
hard
this goes
topic.
back to it's a hard topic, and it's when I get bummed out. Once again, this comes back to Francie v. the man. Like, that's where I'm at, where I'm like, there are systems in place that are feel insurmountable at times to be fighting against in this world of disability. And so, this one little area that I care so passionately about is just today where I'm staking my flag of like, this is where we're at. And so it gets me
And
not necessarily sad, it just gets me very, like, listful or, like, melancholy.
Yeah. Yes. And here's the other thing is that, and I thought about this when we talked about Patrice, the movie,
Mm-hmm.
um, the way that someone quote unquote looks as a child or as a student, growth is still possible when
Yeah.
intellectual disability is part of the picture. So the way that they look or present as a child is not going to be the same as an adult. Like they are going to be different. They are
Yeah.
going to learn and acquire skills. Um,
Newsflash, children with disabilities become adults with disabilities. What?
yeah. And so I thought about when Patrice was sharing like pieces of her life as a young child with a disability or like in elementary school. I thought about like our students, like the
Yeah.
ones that we have on our caseload that may present really similarly to how she did. And then looking at like her life now and how she is able to care for herself and have like pursue this full life that we're talking about with our partner Gary. Like I want that for them. And I feel like we talked about what IQ actually is and got into that because I think it has gotten the pop psychology treatment of people will see low IQ and think, oh, well, they'll never have that. This child will never grow into an adult that's able to pursue a full and
Yeah.
happy life.
Have a job, have a fulfilling community.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a house that was decorated beautifully, like
Have
things
a
like that.
loving partner,
Yeah.
have a relationship, which again, these are not the reality for everyone with this disability because disability is not a monolith. But like, especially when we're talking about kids that have a whole life ahead of them, we can't use IQ to say, well, they'll never learn because growth is still possible and growth will happen. So we need
Yes.
to be as,
Fostering that as much as
yes,
possible.
as the adults in a school environment, we need to be, yeah, still teaching literacy, still teaching content knowledge, still working and striving towards these goals of whatever it is, having a job, living independently, because we're gonna get somewhere. So it's up to us, like where we're gonna go, how far we're gonna go, essentially. Okay, cool. I'm like looking at. I feel like we kind of got off of our own track here, but
I think we can loop this back because once again, with all that growth and progress, you had the bullet point of talking about illusory. Why am I struggling with that? Am I
no,
right on
that's
that?
right. Illusory
Illusory
superiority.
superiority. Yeah. Go off, Maggie.
Yeah, so we've said that this is a highly stigmatized disability. And all right, let me start by saying this. One of my favorite things about learning about human psychology is that the overarching lesson that I learned is that I am not special. I have a human brain that does the same cognitive biases and cognitive processes as everyone else in the world. And because of that, I fall prey sometimes to these cognitive biases. One of which directly kind of like plugs into what we're talking about, is that of illusory superiority. So this is a cognitive bias where people tend to think that they are smarter than they actually are. And that can come off as a little bit harsh, which is why
I'm
I
gonna hold your
prefaced
hand
it.
when I say this. Most people are average.
Yes. So here's the deal is that when we're talking about IQ, we've talked about like the standard bell curve in the past. Most people right in the middle. Like most people, even if you have, several higher education degrees, or if you're a doctor, or if you have a PhD, yeah, you're very smart, very accomplished. Your IQ is statistically most likely average. Like that's most people are going to be within that average range. And I think that I've seen people think this about themselves, assume that their IQ is above average. I've also seen people do this with kids and children of like their child or their grandchild or whatever, say like, oh, he's so smart, like he's got to be above average, or I bet he's so bright. We should, well, Francie, if you want to talk about
Oh.
your gifted program experience, that
So, started at a new school, helping kind of clean up records and things like that. And one of the things that I was helping with was we were digitizing all of our testing protocols. And the Oh, part of that was our gifted testing. If, parents will oftentimes refer their child for gifted testing. And when I tell you, I have never in my life seen a bigger stack of average tests in my entire life. Margaret, there had to be like 300 of them. Like, it
Yeah.
was crazy.
I'm sure.
And you know what? I can't knock them because everybody wants the best for their child, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And they think their child is the best whatever. And that was a huge stack of average. And I love that for them, right? Like, average is the
Average is
biggest
great.
apart. So, like,
It's
cool.
great to be average.
It's great to be average, whatever. So, anyways, a lot of people will think highly of themselves. I feel like I'm included in that amount. I have frequently said, I don't want to be given an IQ test. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I'm happy. Here's the thing. Once again, this goes back to, it's not measuring my worth. I love my job. I love my hobbies. I love my friends. I don't need to know what number my IQ is. Don't tell me. I'm having a great time anyways. So
Yes, very much so. And I joke all the time. I haven't had my IQ tested, at least in a way that I have access to. I might have been when I was in school. But like for the gifted program or something, which I wasn't in, by the way. So if I was tested for it, then I'm average. But having interacted with these full-scale IQs enough, I feel like I could tell you exactly how my like 5 subtest spread would be, which I know that my verbal score would be above average. I know I have an above average vocabulary. That's why I'm in this freaking field. Like language.
There's a reason why I didn't go into math, okay?
Language is my bag. Like, this is my thing. I know that would be above average. Everything else, middle, right in the middle. And
visual spatial in the tank. Okay.
I do believe that visual spatial would actually be below average. I am not good at it. And you know what? 1 above average, 1 below average, everything else in the middle, average. That's going to pull me right in the middle. So I'm like, I feel like that's kind of where I would land, but I'm with you. It doesn't matter because I have what I want. Like, I have gotten to achieve my goals, and I, as kind of an able-bodied, relatively neurotypical person, was able to do so with very little external support. But like, we're in this therapy field. We're here to provide that support for the people who want to achieve their goals and need external support. So illusory superiority is one hell of a drug, and it's a normal cognitive bias, but like everybody kind of falls prey to this. So it feeds into that stigma by most people. Like, people have the tendency to think that they are smarter than they are. So then when they interact with a person who is clinically, quote unquote, less smart, heavy air quotes, there is that kind of like us versus them, or like looking down upon, that can happen, which is really unfortunate and frankly a form of bigotry. So it's not great. Not great. We did kind of talk about off mic the like skyscraper versus house analogy of like, if you are a person who's kind of falling prey to this cognitive bias of illusory superiority, and you think that your brain is a 100-story skyscraper, and someone with an intellectual disability is a single-story ranch-style house, it's like, all right, well, is your skyscraper ugly? Does everyone in your skyscraper suck? Do they all hate their jobs? Like, the people in the single-story ranch-style house are living a great life. They are hanging out with their friends and family. There's a beautiful garden. They're baking in the kitchen, and it's awesome. And your skyscraper sucks. So like,
take that. Like,
take that.
I don't know. Yeah.
And yeah, if you tried to run an office out of a single-story ranch-style house that employed 300 people, then yeah, you would run into some issues there. That would be not the right setting for that. Yeah,
doesn't make the ranch house wrong. It just makes it not for 300 corporate individuals. So anyways, once again, is your skyscraper ugly? Let's talk about it.
Is it ugly?
So value, not inherent to intelligence, not inherent to, I don't know. That's just not how I like to measure how great life is. So
Yeah.
Anyways, that's my take on it for the day.
Yeah, so this is something that
And
we
be
talk
nice to my
about a
friends.
lot. Be nice to our friends,
Be nice
okay?
to my friends.
Not only are you talking about more people than you think you're talking about, um, it's also just like not okay to
And
categorize people like
also,
that.
it's not okay to and then in the presence of intellectual disability, that's fine. I don't I really take beef with people who get so anti, like, no, that couldn't possibly be the case. Like, it's cool if it's there. Like, we're gonna work with it and we're gonna hang out and we're gonna grow. Like, that's the part
Yeah.
that, like, we're gonna grow regardless. It's like, I don't know. Don't
Yeah,
be
this
hateful to my
comes
friends.
it
Mhm.
comes back to this, all emotions are allowed. It's okay as a parent to fear that for your
Yeah.
child because yeah, it does come with challenges. Absolutely it does. Um, but it doesn't, I think a lot of times we fear what we don't understand. And so not knowing how beautiful life can be, or not knowing what opportunities for growth are there, um, can really impact a lot of the fear that families may be feeling when cognitive impairment is a diagnosis that's on the table. So, well,
Yeah.
this is clearly a passion topic for both of us, and we will probably speak about it again. But I think that's enough for
That's it
today.
for today.
before we come up with another like absolutely tortured metaphor to like
Oh man, I was just talking to you about this. I speak in riddles and it's a problem.
yes,
Like, I am the troll under the bridge, like giving you these riddles 3, unfortunately.
unfortunately, we speak in riddles. Um,
No.
so we hope that you'll join us next time for whatever riddle these two bridge trolls
Cook up.
decide to cook up. Um, this has been Tell Me
Ah.
About It, an SLP podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify under the same name. And you can find us on Instagram at Tell Me About It SLP. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.